Do you think the sweetest revenge is forgiveness? Absolutely not. In the ruthless reality I have witnessed and written about for over 20 years, the perfect revenge is a social and financial death sentence calculated down to the very last second. Fasten your seatbelts. The story you are about to hear has no room for weak tears. It is a deadly game of chess where the most arrogant predator is actually the most foolish prey. Hello and welcome back to Violet Revenge Stories, my wonderful listeners. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero operating budget to keep these stories coming. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to survive and continue creating the content you love. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description and pinned comments. Now, let us dive into the life of Avery Morris. The air inside the grand hall of the Austin Tech Elite charity auction was thick with the suffocating scent of expensive perfume and unearned arrogance. Crystal chandeliers cast a sharp, fractured light over the vast ballroom, illuminating the forced smiles of venture capitalists and startup founders desperate for their next round of funding. Avery Morris stepped into the blinding foyer. At 34 years old, she was a senior cybersecurity architect at Vanguard DefSec Solutions, a woman whose daily existence revolved around dismantling complex digital threats before they even materialized. Tonight, she wore a minimalist obsidian black evening gown. It was entirely devoid of flashy sequins or desperate attention-grabbing cuts. She moved with a cold, calculated grace, her face a mask of absolute serenity amidst the chaotic symphony of clinking champagne glasses and hollow laughter. She had barely crossed the marble threshold when the physical manifestation of her past intentionally blocked her path. Julian. Her ex-husband and the current chief executive officer of the most talked-about rising tech startup in the state. He stood dead center in the main lobby, strategically ensuring they were surrounded by a cluster of high-profile angel investors and industry journalists. Clinging tightly to his arm was Chloe. Chloe had been Avery's closest confidant, her former best friend, and a ruthless public relations director who knew exactly how to manipulate an image for maximum damage. Nestled against Chloe's silk-draped chest was a 1-year-old baby boy. The child was dressed in a tailored miniature tuxedo, paraded around as a living, breathing trophy of their ultimate betrayal. Chloe shifted the boy's weight intentionally, extending her left hand so it would catch the blinding light of the overhead chandeliers. A grotesque, massive diamond ring rested heavily on her finger. It was an obscenely large stone, purchased directly from the inflated valuation money of Julian's new company. Chloe offered Avery a smile dripping with synthetic pity, her eyes darting to the surrounding investors to ensure they had a captive audience for this carefully orchestrated humiliation. Julian adjusted his custom-tailored lapels, puffing out his chest. He raised his voice, ensuring the surrounding billionaires could hear every single syllable of his triumph. "Avery, I am genuinely surprised you could afford a ticket to this tier of the event," he declared, his tone laced with a thick, intoxicating layer of condescension. "Are you still wasting your life away in a dark, windowless room with that boring typing job, managing firewalls and playing digital security guard, while the rest of us actually build the future and generate real wealth?" Several investors chuckled softly into their drinks, eager to appease the rising star of the tech world. Julian, fueled by their pathetic validation, took a confident step closer. His eyes, completely devoid of any lingering affection or remorse, scanned her from head to toe with blatant disgust. "You know, looking at my beautiful family right now," Julian continued, gesturing dramatically toward Chloe and the cooing baby boy, "I realize that walking away from you was the absolutely greatest decision I have ever made in my entire life. A man in my position needs a legacy. I needed a real woman by my side. Not a cold, unfeeling, calculating machine. Not a defective product incapable of giving birth." The opulent foyer went completely, terrifyingly silent. The sheer cruelty of the public insult hung in the chilled air, a heavy, suffocating weight that would have instantly crushed a lesser woman into dust. Chloe smirked, her perfectly painted lips curling upwards as she waited for the inevitable emotional breakdown. She waited for Avery to scream, to cry, to throw her glass of vintage champagne in a fit of hysterical, broken rage. But Avery did not shed a single tear. Her heart rate, perfectly monitored by the sleek smartwatch resting on her left wrist, did not spike even a fraction of a beat. The muscles in her jaw remained completely relaxed. She looked at the blinding diamond, then at the innocent baby boy, and finally locked her icy gaze with the arrogant man who thought he had stolen 4 years of her life and gotten away with it. A faint, almost imperceptible smile graced Avery's lips. It was not a smile of submission or defeat, but the chilling, anticipatory grin of an apex predator observing a blind rat stepping willingly onto a lethal trap. She calmly raised her left wrist, casually checking the digital face of her smartwatch. She tapped the glass screen exactly once. In the absolute silence of her brilliant mind, she began counting down the seconds to their total, inescapable financial and social annihilation. Julian's hand clamped down on Avery's elbow, his grip tight enough to bruise her skin through the dark fabric of her dress. He aggressively steered her away from the crowded lobby, dragging her toward a secluded alcove hidden behind the velvet-draped cocktail bar. He craved absolute privacy for this next phase. Public humiliation was merely a delightful appetizer, but Julian was a man who hungered for the main course. He desperately wanted to witness the exact moment her stoic facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He wanted to see her beg, to watch the reality of her total defeat wash over her face. He shoved her slightly, forcing her back against a cold marble pillar. "You are putting up a fantastic front, Avery," he sneered, invading her personal space to assert his dominance. "But we both know you are bleeding out inside right now. Do you have any idea how effortlessly simple it was to legally destroy you? My legal team ran absolute circles around your pathetic representation. When the judge signed those final divorce papers, I walked away with 100% of the intellectual property, every single algorithm, every single patent. I left you with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back and your worthless pride." Avery maintained her serene composure. She leaned casually against the stone, her expression entirely unreadable, her breathing steady and rhythmic. This impenetrable wall of silence acted like highly volatile fuel on the raging fire of Julian's ego. He hated that he could not control her emotions. He needed to inflict maximum psychological damage to satisfy his own insecurities. Leaning in so close that she could smell the sharp tang of expensive bourbon on his breath, Julian dropped his voice to a venomous, conspiratorial whisper. "You still do not get it, do you? You actually think I just magically built a better product. You think I am simply a superior visionary who outworked you. Let me tell you a little secret since you are completely powerless to do anything about it now. Tomorrow morning, my company is being officially acquired for $2 billion, and the core architecture, the revolutionary deep learning firewall that has the defense contractors practically begging to write me blank checks." He paused. A wicked, triumphant grin spreading across his face. "It is yours, Avery. It is the exact same base source code you wrote in our basement 4 years ago. I simply slapped a sleek new graphic interface on it, altered the variable names, and patented it under my own corporate entity while you were busy playing the naive, supportive wife. You did all the heavy lifting, and I am the one walking away with a 10-figure payout." Chloe, having handed the child off to a hired nanny near the coat check, slithered up beside him like a viper. She wrapped her arm around his waist, resting her head on his shoulder with a sickeningly sweet giggle. "Oh, Julian, do not be too hard on her. It is not her fault she is so painfully gullible." Chloe turned her sharp, calculating gaze to Avery. "Remember when you trusted me with your backup server passwords because you thought a best friend should have emergency access? You practically handed me the keys to the kingdom. I downloaded every single line of your encrypted data during our weekend spa trips and walked it right over to Julian's laptop. You literally built his empire for him, and you did not even realize you were being robbed blind by the two people you trusted most in the entire world. They stood there together, a united front of pure, unadulterated malice, thoroughly convinced of their absolute invincibility. They believed they were the masterminds of the century, untouchable titans of the technology industry. They were entirely oblivious to the microscopic, rhythmic blinking of a singular red dot illuminating the sleek black glass of Avery's smartwatch. With every arrogant syllable that spilled from their careless mouths, high-definition audio was being recorded, instantly encrypted, and silently uploaded via a secure cellular connection to an offshore cloud server. They had just provided a pristine, uncoerced, joint verbal confession to federal intellectual property theft and corporate espionage. Avery allowed exactly 5 seconds of silence to pass, letting the immense gravity of their self-incrimination settle perfectly onto the immutable digital record. She slowly raised her crystal glass, watching the amber liquid swirl gently inside. "Well," Avery said, her voice smooth as silk and utterly devoid of any detectable malice. "That is certainly quite the accomplishment. I wish you both nothing but the exact future you have built for yourselves. Congratulations on your upcoming $2 billion acquisition, Julian." She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink, turned on her heel, and glided away into the sea of evening gowns and tuxedos. She left them standing in the dim alcove, thoroughly convinced they had won the war, completely unaware that the guillotine blade had already been released and was plummeting swiftly toward their necks. The ambient temperature in Avery's downtown apartment was precisely regulated to 68 degrees, optimal for the towering server racks humming softly in what used to be her dining room. She stepped out of her heels and stripped off the minimalist black gown, replacing it with a loose dark sweatshirt and tactical trousers. This was her war room, a sanctuary built from pure logic, copper wire, and raw processing power. She sank into her ergonomic leather chair, the array of 6 curved monitors bathing her sharp features in a harsh blue light. She cracked her knuckles. The recorded confession from the gala was safely secured in her encrypted cloud vault, but a verbal admission from 2 arrogant fools was merely the opening gambit. Avery wanted absolute, undeniable leverage. She began her hunt with Chloe. Julian was arrogant, but Chloe was fundamentally greedy, and greed always left a careless digital paper trail. Avery launched her custom packet-sniffing algorithms and began tearing through the heavily obfuscated layers of Chloe's online footprint. She bypassed standard consumer-grade firewalls like they were wet paper tissue, diving deep into the former public relations director's shadow accounts. It did not take long for the first massive anomaly to trigger a flashing red alert on her 4th screen. There was a highly suspicious influx of decentralized cryptocurrency flowing into a hidden digital wallet owned by Chloe. The timeline of these deposits was the most damning part. The initial transfers, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, began rolling in exactly 8 months before Avery and Julian had even initiated their divorce proceedings. Avery's fingers flew relentlessly across the mechanical keyboard, tracing the intricate web of blockchain transactions. The sender was utilizing a complex laundering protocol, bouncing the digital coins through dozens of dummy nodes located in Eastern Europe and offshore tax havens to mask the origin point. But Avery was the exact security architect who had designed the countermeasures for systems precisely like this. She methodically unraveled the tangled thread, stripping away the proxy internet protocol addresses one by one until the master node was laid bare. The money was not coming from a random shell corporation. The funds were originating directly from the private holding company of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a legendary Silicon Valley billionaire, and more importantly, Julian's most bitter, ruthless market competitor. Avery leaned back in her chair. a sharp exhale escaping her lips as the puzzle pieces slammed into place with sickening clarity. Chloe did not love Julian. She never had. Chloe was a highly paid corporate mercenary, an economic spy meticulously planted by Marcus to infiltrate Julian's inner circle, monitor the startup's growth, and eventually steal whatever proprietary data Julian claimed to create. Julian believed he had manipulated everyone around him, yet he was completely blind to the fact that his perfect new partner was actively selling his corporate secrets to his worst enemy. However, a nagging inconsistency began to itch at the back of Avery's analytical mind. If Chloe was merely a transient operative working for a rival billionaire, why would she permanently tie herself to Julian by having his child? Spies require clean exit strategies, not 18-year financial and emotional commitments. Driven by this logical discrepancy, Avery pivoted her attack vector. She targeted the regional medical database. She remembered a glaring vulnerability in the server architecture of the elite private hospital where Chloe had delivered the baby, an unpatched flaw stemming from an old public insurance litigation case. Avery executed a silent zero-day exploit, slipping past the hospital's outdated security protocols like a ghost. She bypassed the standard public records and dug straight into the secured maternity ward archives, pulling the raw, unedited blood panel and genetic screening reports from the exact day of the delivery. She ran a rapid comparative analysis against the public genetic markers she already had on file for Julian, data salvaged from a previous health insurance audit they had completed as a married couple. The loading bar on her primary monitor crawled forward, ruthlessly calculating the probability of paternity. When the bold text finally flashed across the screen, it delivered a silent, devastating blow. 0% probability. The infant did not share a single strand of deoxyribonucleic acid with Julian. The child was absolutely not his. Avery rapidly cross-referenced the baby's genetic markers with the newly acquired profile she had just built for Marcus Thorne. The system chimed softly. It was a perfect, undeniable match. The baby belonged to the billionaire rival. Chloe and Marcus had engaged in a secret, illicit affair, resulting in an unplanned pregnancy. Instead of facing the scandal, Chloe had fabricated a brilliantly wicked solution. She had forged the initial maternity documents and bribed an administrative worker to alter the paternity records, orchestrating a masterful deception to convince Julian the child was his own flesh and blood. She used the innocent boy as a biological anchor, trapping Julian into a relationship and using his new wealth as a temporary shield to hide her betrayal from the rest of the world. Avery stopped typing. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the cooling fans. She stared at the digital mountain of evidence meticulously organized across her 6 screens. In less than 4 hours, she had systematically dismantled their entire existence. She now held 3 definitive death sentences in her hands. She possessed the audio recording of Julian confessing to federal source code theft. She had the financial logs proving Chloe was committing severe commercial espionage, and she held the catastrophic, irrefutable medical records exposing the brutal truth about the child's bloodline. The digital guillotine was fully assembled. It was time to guide the prey directly to the chopping block. Avery could have burned them right then and there. She could have forwarded the audio file and the medical records to the press, effectively ending Julian before the sun came up. But destroying a man while he was simply standing in a ballroom was remarkably inefficient. To inflict maximum permanent damage, you do not push your enemy off the ground floor. You allow them to climb to the very pinnacle of the tallest skyscraper, let them admire the breathtaking view, and then you obliterate the foundation. The official signing ceremony with the defense contractor was scheduled in precisely 48 hours. She would let Julian walk into that boardroom believing he was about to become a billionaire. She initiated the final phase of her strategy by engineering a highly specialized digital weapon. It was a custom-built stealth Trojan, elegant in its malicious simplicity. Avery did not need to break down his corporate firewalls with brute force. She only needed to exploit the massive, fragile ego of a thief. She crafted an automated email carefully disguised to look exactly like an urgent, top-tier security alert from his primary cloud hosting provider. The subject line warned of a critical, undetected vulnerability within the root directory of the core algorithms. Julian was a man consumed by the paranoid fear of being exposed, primarily because he knew deep down that he did not actually understand the complex mathematics running his own company. When the email landed in his private executive inbox at 2 o'clock in the morning, his reaction was entirely predictable. Panic instantly overrode proper security protocol. The prospect of a $2 billion acquisition failing during a final technical audit terrified him beyond rational thought. At that exact moment, Julian was lounging inside the sprawling $10 million estate he had recently purchased for Chloe in the upscale hills of Westlake. In his frantic rush to verify that his stolen golden goose was still intact, he committed the ultimate cardinal sin of cybersecurity. He flipped open his laptop and connected directly to the home's standard, unencrypted residential wireless network. He completely bypassed the mandatory virtual private network tunnels required for high-level administrative access. He was too desperate, too arrogant to believe he could be targeted in his own lavish sanctuary. He clicked the verification link embedded in Avery's spoofed email, logging directly into the Central Command dashboard using his master administrator credentials. The moment his keystrokes registered, the trap slammed shut. From her dimly lit apartment miles away, Avery watched her monitors light up as the payload successfully deployed. The Trojan did not crash his servers or steal his client data. Instead, it operated like an invisible, microscopic surveillance drone. It forced Julian's active administrator session to initiate a deep diagnostic sweep across the entire proprietary framework. As the system scanned the architecture, it was forced to read and compile every single line of the stolen security protocol. Avery's malicious script waited patiently in the background. As the code executed, the Trojan hunted for highly specific cryptographic watermarks. Years ago, while initially designing the system, Avery had woven complex, invisible digital signatures into the fundamental logic gates of the software. These were structural markers that could not be deleted without causing the entire framework to collapse. The Trojan identified every single one of these hidden signatures, proving unequivocally that the software Julian was currently operating was her exact original creation. The malware worked flawlessly. It captured the live server logs, recorded his master login credentials, and mapped the exact geographical Internet Protocol address of the unsecured wireless network he was using. It sealed all of this data into an encrypted, immutable forensic packet and silently transmitted it back to Avery's private server. Avery leaned back and allowed herself a brief, chilling sigh of absolute satisfaction. The circle was now complete. She possessed undeniable, court-admissible evidence from both sides of the equation. She had his arrogant verbal confession from the charity gala, and now she held the federal digital footprint of him actively operating a massive corporate server built entirely on stolen intellectual property. There was absolutely no avenue of escape left. The hunter had effectively locked the prey inside the cage, and she alone held the key. The boardroom located on the 50th floor of the monolithic defense contractor headquarters felt less like a standard corporate meeting space and more like a heavily guarded temple of supreme wealth. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the sprawling city below. Julian stood confidently at the head of a massive mahogany table, casually adjusting his custom silk tie. Directly in front of him sat the entire board of directors and the chief executive officer of the acquiring firm. The finalized acquisition contract, representing a historic valuation of exactly $2 billion, rested on the polished wood alongside a heavily engraved gold pen. In the front row of the private observation gallery, Chloe sat perfectly poised. She bounced the baby boy gently on her lap, her eyes reflecting the gleaming skyscrapers outside. She was already mentally spending the 10-figure payout, completely lost in a vivid daydream of private jets, Mediterranean yachts, and a lifetime of untouchable luxury. Julian cleared his throat, commanding the attention of the room, preparing to deliver his final triumphant speech. "Gentlemen, what you are purchasing today is not merely a software package," Julian announced, his voice dripping with unbearable self-importance. "It is an impenetrable digital shield for our entire nation. It is the pinnacle of modern cybersecurity." Before he could utter another self-aggrandizing syllable, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding, violent thud. Every head in the room instantly turned. Avery strode over the threshold. She was not wearing an evening gown or playing the role of the defeated ex-wife. She wore a sharp-tailored charcoal suit, her posture radiating absolute authority. She held a sleek silver tablet in her right hand. The smug, victorious smile vanished from Julian's face in a fraction of a second, immediately replaced by a flash of irritated confusion. "Avery, what on earth are you doing here?" Julian demanded, his voice cracking slightly. He looked toward the door. "Security, please remove this woman immediately." The chief executive officer of the defense firm raised a hand, stopping the heavily armed guards from taking a single step forward. "Stand down," the chief executive officer commanded. "She is exactly where she needs to be. Gentlemen, allow me to formally introduce Avery Morris. We hired Vanguard DefSec Solutions as an independent third party to conduct the final mandatory technical audit of this acquisition project. Ms. Morris is their lead senior auditor." The color drained completely from Julian's face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Avery walked calmly to the front of the room, completely ignoring his panicked, wide-eyed stare. She connected her tablet directly to the central presentation console. The massive screens behind Julian flickered, instantly replacing his sleek corporate logo with two dense, rapidly scrolling columns of complex source code. "Thank you, sir," Avery addressed the board members, her voice echoing clearly and coldly across the dead, silent room. "I was tasked with verifying the proprietary nature of this product before your corporation transferred $2 billion. Unfortunately, I must advise you to immediately and permanently terminate this deal. You are about to purchase stolen federal property." Avery tapped her screen. "On the left side of the projection is the architecture your technical team evaluated," she explained smoothly. "On the right side is a patented security system I personally designed and encrypted exactly 4 years ago. Notice the highlighted sections." Bright yellow text illuminated the massive screens. While the variable names and graphical interfaces have been completely scrubbed to hide the theft, the core logic gates contain immutable, encrypted digital signatures. These are structural watermarks that cannot be erased without destroying the entire operating system. Before anyone could speak, she pressed another button. The crystal-clear audio recording from the charity gala flooded the boardroom speakers. Julian's own voice echoed off the mahogany walls, arrogantly bragging about stealing her work, keeping 100% of the intellectual property, and slapping a new interface on her code. Pure, unadulterated panic seized Julian. The board members were already standing up, their faces pale with outrage and disgust. Julian desperately looked around the room, his massive ego completely refusing to accept defeat. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at Chloe in the observation gallery. "It was her!" Julian screamed, his voice pitching into a hysterical whine. "She did it! I had absolutely no idea the source code was stolen. Chloe took it from Avery's servers and brought it to me. She manipulated the entire situation. She is the corporate spy. I am the victim here." Chloe gasped loudly, her face twisting in pure, horrifying betrayal as the man she had anchored herself to instantly threw her to the federal wolves to save his own skin. Avery smiled. It was a cold, merciless, and terrifying expression. "Actually, Julian, you are entirely correct about Chloe being a corporate spy," Avery said. her tone cutting through the chaos like a freshly sharpened blade. "But you are terribly mistaken about who she actually works for." Avery swiped her screen again. The source code vanished, instantly replaced by a detailed, heavily tracked financial ledger. "This is a verified blockchain cryptocurrency transaction history," Avery announced. "Over the past 24 months, Chloe has received hundreds of thousands of dollars in hidden offshore funds from the private holding company of Marcus Thorne. She was meticulously planted in your life to monitor your startup's progress and eventually steal the very asset you stole from me." Julian stumbled backward, his hip crashing violently into the edge of the mahogany table. "Marcus?" Julian whispered, his eyes darting frantically. "No, that is impossible. That is insane. She is the mother of my child." Avery did not miss a single beat. The screen shifted one final time, displaying a heavily redacted but legally certified medical document bearing the seal of the state hospital. "Since we are clearing the air regarding fraudulent assets, I felt it was absolutely necessary to audit the entire foundation of your partnership," Avery stated, her voice devoid of any pity. "The document currently displayed is a legally verified genetic screening from the exact day of the delivery, cross-referenced with public medical records. The probability of paternity between you and the infant currently sitting in that room is exactly 0%. The biological father is your billionaire rival, Marcus Thorne. Chloe forged the maternity documents to use you as a temporary wealthy shield to hide her affair." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. And then, the boardroom descended into sheer, uncontrollable pandemonium. The chief executive officer barked furious orders to his legal team to lock the doors and call the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Chloe was hyperventilating uncontrollably in the gallery, clutching the crying baby as the horrifying realization of her impending federal prison sentence crashed down upon her. Julian slowly fell to his knees. His meticulously crafted reality had entirely disintegrated. In less than 5 minutes, he had lost his $2 billion empire, realized his entire family was a calculated financial lie, and discovered he had been raising and funding his worst enemy's child. His massive, fragile ego shattered into a million irreparable fragments right there on the floor, leaving him as nothing but a pathetic, hollow shell weeping in a boardroom that had just become the site of his ultimate social and financial execution. The chief executive officer of the defense conglomerate did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He picked up the secure, encrypted telephone resting in the center of the conference table and immediately dialed the direct line to the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The historic $2 billion acquisition was officially dead, instantaneously replaced by a massive, multi-agency criminal probe into severe financial fraud, wire fraud, and grand-scale intellectual property theft. Before the echoes of the chaotic boardroom could even begin to settle, the heavy oak doors swung open once more. Marcus Thorne, the rival billionaire, walked into the room with the terrifying calm of a man who held absolute power. He was flanked by a tight phalanx of 3 elite corporate attorneys. Marcus had been quietly alerted to the genetic revelation the moment Avery's automated decryption process had finished compiling the medical records the night before. He did not even cast a passing glance at the weeping, broken man thrashing on the floor. Marcus walked straight into the private observation gallery and calmly, coldly took the crying baby boy directly from Chloe's trembling arms. His lead attorney immediately handed her a heavily stamped emergency custody order. Chloe reached out frantically, her perfectly manicured hands shaking violently as she begged Marcus for help. She pleaded with him to remember the luxurious life he had promised her, to protect her from the impending fallout. But Marcus looked at her with the exact same utter detachment one might use when discarding a broken, useless tool. "You were hired to do a job, Chloe, and you became a liability," Marcus stated, his voice completely devoid of any human warmth. "You are no longer a useful asset to my organization. You are now a massive federal target currently under investigation for corporate espionage, and I do not associate with criminals." Marcus turned and walked out with his son, leaving her completely abandoned. Chloe collapsed into a hysterical screaming fit, her cries echoing pathetically against the glass walls. The $10 million mansion nestled in the hills, the grotesque diamond rings, the billionaire lifestyle, and now even the innocent child she had used as a manipulative pawn were all gone in an instant. She was left with absolutely nothing but the terrifying, inescapable reality of a lengthy federal prison sentence. The federal agents arrived less than 15 minutes later. They marched into the room and hauled Julian off the polished mahogany floor, forcefully slamming his hands behind his back. The cold, unforgiving steel of the handcuffs clicked sharply against the sleeves of his custom-tailored suit jacket. As they dragged him toward the exit, his legs completely gave out beneath him. He fell to his knees for a second time, tears streaming uncontrollably down his face, his massive ego entirely pulverized. He looked up at Avery, his voice reduced to a pathetic, trembling whisper as he begged her for mercy. He begged her to drop the federal charges, frantically promising he would give her everything back, that they could start over. Avery did not say a single word. She did not smile, and she did not gloat. She simply looked down at him with an expression of absolute chilling contempt, watching silently as the agents dragged him out of the room and out of her life forever. The legal aftermath was swift and brutally efficient. Within 6 months, a federal judge ordered the complete dissolution of Julian's fraudulent corporate empire. As direct restitution for the stolen code and the years of emotional and financial damages, the courts awarded Avery 100% ownership of the remaining intellectual property. With the legal titles fully cleared, she immediately turned around and sold the uncontaminated algorithms to a private ethical defense coalition for a staggering $800 million. Julian and Chloe both received sentences of over 10 years in federal penitentiaries, their names permanently blacklisted and disgraced. 1 year later, Avery stood on the rooftop of the newly constructed Vanguard DefSec Solutions Tower, no longer just a senior architect, but the sole owner and chief executive officer of the entire firm. The cool evening breeze gently swept past her as she held a crystal glass of vintage red wine. She looked out over the sprawling city skyline, the glittering lights reflecting in her calm, victorious eyes. Her empire was built on truth, patience, and unparalleled brilliance. She was completely free, an untouchable legend in the technology world who had executed the most flawless, bloodless assassination in Silicon Valley history. Thank you so very much for listening to today's story, my wonderful audience. Where in the world are you tuning in from today? Please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they can feed their families and continue creating these amazing stories for you. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.